Hey everybody, we're really excited to announce that on Friday, August 19, we are going to be doing our first ever live show at the New York City Pinball Championships.
Now, some of you may remember our emergency episode back in the day where we talked about Deep Root Pinball and the absolute torrent of scandals that came along with some of the worst pinball machines ever made. And if you don't know about it, go listen to the episode. But we're going to follow up on that story because, hey, history keeps happening in the world of pinball.
So head on over to nycpinballchamps.com to get more information about that. And if you would like to get a discount, check out our Patreon.
Muy caliente, Gloria. Hey, let's go conquer near and far. Look out, here comes Zanzibar. Let's crush them with our iron fist. They've got nukes, and boy, do they look
Christopher Tin's legendary tune at some point, AJ. You're taking a lot of liberties with the melody.
How long did it take you to come up with those lyrics? I know you really care about that.
13 seconds.
Great. Love it.
Can you put it in Swahili next?
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast done entirely in Swahili. I am the Worst of All Possible AJs.
I'm the Worst of All Possible Brian's.
And I'm the Worst of All Possible Josh's, here for yet another fun, exciting installment of the Worst of All Possible Worlds. And we're joined by longtime friend of the show and fan favorite, Nate Bethea.
Hello, thank you again for having me. I am very excited to talk about the absolute scourge of my free time as a teenager and as a college student, Sid Meier Civilization. From Civilization 2 to Civilization 6, with me randomly never playing Civ 5 for some reason, but playing Civ 6 like fucking wild. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. I'm inspired to talk about the epistemology of a world in which you can, in fact, destroy a tank with a spearman.
You certainly can.
You could once. Now it's a bit more challenging.
Yeah.
Oh my God. In Civ 2, man, fucking phalanxes just could get the job done no matter what. And once you got pikemen, forget about it. We're not going to really be talking so much about Civ 2 today. We're going to talk a little bit about Civilization as a series overall. And then we're really going to be digging more specifically into Civilization 6, because I know that is the one that we all sort of have the most common experience with. Probably the best way to start an episode about Civilization. And by the way, Nate, we're very happy also to have you on. I should say this. We're very happy to have you on to talk about something that isn't going to torment your soul and that isn't also going to ask you to convert.
At least to our better knowledge, it won't.
Maybe not. But at least it's not more fucking Odyssey.
You've done two episodes of Odyssey in a row, Nate, and we wanted to reward that.
But I've had to listen to all of the source material, and I don't like to go on a podcast without having prepared. So I have subjected myself to, I think, a grand total of around 4.5 hours of Odyssey, and I'm ready to do fucking Bleeding Kansas on evangelical Christianity. Just extirpate it. Eric Prince, you're gonna meet your fucking match.
Well, and especially because we subjected you to those anti-city dweller slurs last time too, which must have been very offensive for
we wanted to give you an
like
opportunity to build cities now. And make more sitters for yourself.
I feel as though there's something about the Civilization universe that you come out of it thinking like all of humanity is progressing in a positive direction, that long-term things are going to be okay. And like, even if that's not the case, you can still really kind of like warm your heart being like, yes, you see, it did. There was this inspirational choir singing in Swahili, and I have manifested humanity's progression from first settling on a river bend all the way to launching this fucked up space station. And I just, genuinely, there's something fun about it. There's something weird, all-encompassing, positive about it. So yeah, different than Odyssey for sure.
Different and I would argue better.
John Avery Whittaker, will you build a civilization that stands the test of time?
We get the guy who played Wit on the show to just do the Sputnik noise. Just go beep, 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 beep.
It'd be very interesting if Wit declared war on someone and as he was destroying their city in Civ 6 said, well, this is the start of the holiday season, not the arguing season, and then just murdered all of your troops.
So we should probably start this by talking a little bit about the history of Civilization itself, the game, the franchise.
Yeah, well, so we had simulator games going back to like Utopia in 1978, 79, something like that. And then Sid Meier's company, Microprose, was making a lot of varied simulation games, right? So there was Pirates, an exclamation point, which was the first to bear Sid Meier's name, I think. There was Railroad Tycoon. There were a lot of games that they weren't necessarily God games. Railroad Tycoon was, but they were like procedurally generated so that you could have sort of a new story every time, but you could play as like a single character in some of them. And then they decided just after the success of Railroad Tycoon, which was a huge like explosion for them, Civilization was their next point. They thought, what if we applied this to like this idea of human history and this very, very large scale game? First, it was going to be an RTS. That was the original build of this thing.
Oh, wow.
Then they couldn't get it to work. And slowly, and especially after discovering the board game Civilization, which was a British board game, and actually getting the rights to use that name, they tried to go with another name. They just thought Civilization is good, so we'll use the pieces that we took from that and acknowledge them.
There's another interesting piece to that as well, which is that the actual real-time mechanic that they were originally working with was actually kind of like Sim City, where the idea is that you would zone stuff and you would watch it grow over time. The problem was that just wasn't very fun. And,
right. And it was more fun to make active choices.
Right. And there's a really great interview with Sid Meier that Ars Technica did, and we can link that in the show notes, where he sort of talks about what this mechanic looked like and how it felt. And he even notes in that interview that Age of Empires, which would end up coming out in 97, sort of was able to accomplish what they weren't able to do at that time due to the limitations of the technology in 1990.
Right, like whatever. Age of Empires looks way better, right? It's just a time when computers could process a lot more graphically. And also it's just much smaller scale. Right? Age of Empires, you're not going to be building more than a couple of settlements. And it's just map by map by map by map.
It's not turn-based, and there's also an extent to which it's, if I remember correctly with Age of Empires, like it kind of lends itself more to sort of in-game quest style things in the kind of like Diablo vein, as opposed to Civilization, where like you can have a theme in the same way that you can have in SimCity, you could have themes of like fix this fucked up problem or whatever in kind of a scenario, but it's not the same as like a literal almost like quest kind of thing. And so, I mean, it's definitely, I feel like you can feel that change in the Civilization franchise as it goes from being hardcore, like board game turn-based to a still turn-based game, but one that is far more kind of like incorporating the popular elements of games like Age of Empires, which I also played as a teenager. So definitely like...
me too.
At first, I was sort of like, what the fuck is this when Civ started doing it? But I actually think they've improved the franchise by having kind of conceded that a little bit.
Absolutely. My high school drama teacher was the test programmer on Age of Empires and got a cut of every game going forward. So he is a very rich man.
He's doing very well. Yes.
Wow.
It's fascinating to see sort of the evolution of the Civ franchise too, because I went back and played a little 5 in preparation for this, and it's amazing, like in between installments, just like the vast technological leaps that happened like literally every single time.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too, because I don't know if you've ever played, I want to think it's called Civilization Revolutions, the one that was on iOS.
The sort of streamlined one.
Yeah, which is interesting because there's a weird kind of moment where even though PC games were already getting to the point where you could have way more advanced things like sound, video clips, stuff like animations, that it wouldn't have to be like, because think about Age of Empires and like kind of how some of it had to be kind of formulaic and repetitive because there was just a limitation on data, on storage. It was run off CD, that kind of a thing. So like your priest always had to make that noise like ayo, that fucking noise. Whereas like in the older Civ games, you've got, or the newer Civ games rather, you've got like way more advanced things because it can be, you've got stuff in every language and so on and so forth. Civilization Revolutions was interesting because it was limited on as a like an early stage of like early days of apps being a thing on iOS had to. So if you've ever played that, it has some of the most fucked up annoying voices because they wanted to make it seem like the real Civ's franchise, but they couldn't, they didn't have the space for that. So they just made up gibberish noises that people talk and like, your advisors pop up and they go, Tom the door. boom, the hey-bo, and like these weird fucking noises.
That's horrible.
And anyone who's played that game will recognize the horror of like, oh shit, I didn't turn my phone on silent when like they're making these gibberish baby talk noises at me.
Then the entire bus of people is just staring at you.
I mean, fucking 100%. I was riding a Bolt bus from New York to DC like in 2010, and that shit happened. People look at me like I was watching fucking Teletubbies on my phone, like genuinely.
It soothes me.
I was dating a guy, and the topic of the Civilization games came up, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I love Civ Rev." And that was probably the first point where I realized this wasn't going to turn out well.
God damn it! You don't understand what you're fucking with.
So yeah, I mean, after the original Civilization came out, and that was in 1991, it was a big hit, and it really, I mean, Microprose at this point was pretty well known for their sims, largely their flight sims, but also games like Railroads. And this really put them on the map.
Because they started with just flight simulators. That was their big business. And when they made Civilization, especially doing a turn-based game, that just was not hot.
Right.
It was not something that people said that they wanted at the time. And it was a turn-based game based on history. Like, it sounded like it was just going to be an extremely like niche product.
Right.
Yeah. And the next year, everything was a turn-based strategy game. Right. It changed the market like overnight.
And it also sort of put the idea of 4X on the map.
Explore, expand, exploit, exterminate.
It's not just something where you are running around for the sake of like just doing exploration or just doing combat. It's taking all of these things and combining them into one game. That hadn't really been done before Civilization in that way. And then after the original Civ, you know, there were a number of other games. Of course, they had to have sequels, and each sequel was better than the last, except for Civ 3, which fucking sucked.
Really?
I will die on this hill.
What happened? What happened with Civ 3?
I don't know. I just don't like it. It doesn't feel good to me mechanically.
That was the first game with borders.
It was.
Yes. And that's right.
Yeah, Josh hates borders.
I hate them.
We know this.
That's right.
Well, they're out of business now, so I think you won.
I prefer Barnes & Noble.
Yeah.
But yeah, Civ 2 in 96. There was Alpha Centauri, which was a sci-fi sort of Civ 2-like game in 99.
And Civ 2, they took a cue from the Doom playbook and allowed for open modding and everything like that. So they even released a pack of 20 scenarios, and I think half of those were favorites from the net.
It is kind of weird how modding can go in either way, that you could wind up being these really niche advanced scenarios or like sci-fi things are really taken into a fully different direction on the engine, the way that like Doom or some of these other things, like I'm thinking of like even some of like the fan lore around StarCraft, or it can be like ROM hacking where it's just like we made Super Porno Brothers and it's originally Mario but everyone's naked, like things along those lines. It can really go one of two ways, but it's gonna go hard one or the other.
I was reading the other day about something called TTP. This is a real thing in game development. TTP stands for time to penis. It's the rough amount of time after a given game is released that some modder, some enterprising modder will find a way to put a dick in the game.
My brother is a little bit older than me and has an interesting up and down life, but he lived the dream of every kid in the late 80s, early 90s, which is my brother learned Japanese to the point where he is fluent in the language, lived in Japan for 10 years, was an electrical engineer, and learned how to make his own Nintendo games. He worked in field programmable gate arrays, but specifically hardware engineering. He knows how to flash ROMs. He knows how to edit ROMs. He's done this. My brother is the kind of person that like, alcohol doesn't go well with him. Guy from the Midwest, this is a thing. And one time he told me a story that he came home completely blackout, had no recollection of what happened the night before, but he had a huge bruise on his arm. He had a half-eaten like peppermint brownie from Starbucks, and he had bought an NES game called Legacy of the Wizard, and he had no recollection of this whatsoever, but also one summer living in West Lafayette, Indiana, he paid his entire rent by making counterfeit NES versions of Earthbound, which was originally made as an NES game on. Anyway, so the guy who owned the one English translation for like the fan ROM community was like, okay, you can rip this ROM and you can share it online so people can play it and see it. My brother, being a fucking genius, found this and then found the equivalent chipset you need to run that on, and so he'd buy like whatever bullshit game that was, flash the ROM onto that card, print out a fake label, and said, "I have the one copy of this," and sold it on eBay. And this is like 9 fucking times, and he made enough money doing this to pay his rent the whole summer he wasn't in school until the guy who owned the actual fucking physical copy, the real one, found out and started sending him death threats, and he wound up having to move. Like, I'm not making this up. This is in 2001.
No, that's much too specific of a story to be something.
No, of course.
I know so much about the ROM modding fan community because of my brother. And so like anytime I think about this stuff, like the reason I never went down the rabbit hole and I was perfectly fine with just downloading whatever DLC they sold is that like I know how dark that fucking world can get.
You don't want to take that path because you don't know where it may lead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so Civilization and games like it were, I think I just was never so adventurous that I wanted to be like, well, maybe this fucking weird setup after weeks of messing with it'll work. I just wanted to play a game and have it work. And so Civ's been, if I remember correctly, like I want to say I remember seeing some of the mods for Civ 2, but I think it was 3 was I think the first one where you started seeing some of the scenarios set up, and then it really started happening with DLC with 4 and certainly 5 and 6.
Yeah, and the whole scenario thing, that was, as we were saying before, it got its start with 2. And there were a few scenarios that were actually built into the game. And this is one of the things that has ended up becoming a big part of the DNA of Civilization, is this idea of emergent storytelling through gameplay. I went on No Cartridge, actually, with Trevor Strunk a very long time ago, back before I was good at podcasting, and talked about this basic thing, the fact that like every time you play Civ, you are telling another story. Other games in the series, you know, we mentioned 2, Alpha Centauri, 3, Civ 4 came out in 2005, Civ 5 came out in 2010. There was Beyond Earth, which was basically an attempt to redo Alpha Centauri that came out in 2014. It wasn't very well received.
No, it's not great.
But then Civ 6 came out in 2016, which was the 25th anniversary of the release of the original Civilization. That's the game we're going to be talking first and foremost about today. Whether we're talking about original Civ all the way up to Civ 6 and its numerous expansions, when you think about Civilization, what is the first memory that pops into your head?
It's fall semester in 1999. I'm a freshman in high school, and we're staying up all night fucking playing Civ 2, basically just doing one of those like gang matches where everyone has to take their turn, so everyone has to have their time at the computer, and no one wants to admit they're too tired or bored of the game, but we just keep going. My friend at the time, one of my buddies from the cross country team, we're still friends to this day, lives in Portland now, doesn't game very much anymore, but we wound up going to the same university, and he continued this habit and played Civ 3 on his laptop and would have like, you know, a months long game going where it's like the year 4000 AD and he's nuked every other country and stuff like that. He loved playing the game, like really, really paying attention to developing it out into something. And so we have these marathon sessions with it. That was my first memory of it. I had played games like early PC games, or I guess not early in the sense of when you think of how long PC games has been around, but early like 486 VGA games like Global Effect, SimCity 2000. And then obviously, you know, I think Age of Empires, we just talked about that, and StarCraft, Diablo really kind of changed that mechanism of how people assumed a game like a perspective game was going to be played.
Yeah.
But I think Civ 2, the just bizarre things you could do, and some things that I wish were still around, like things where you could gift a unit to another civilization and they would like reverse engineer all the tech around it, stuff like that. In the same way that I wish Civ 6 allowed you to culture bomb to expand your borders, because that was fucking hilarious when you do that. Like there are things about Civ 2 that are very clunky. Replacing your roads with railroads is irritating as hell. The fucking your tank got killed by 5 spearmen is really irritating. And and in retrospect, if you played it now, like unless you had the nostalgia value or you were really, really curious, it just wouldn't be that fun of a game to play because stuff is advanced. But to me, it's Carmel, Indiana, 1999. It's like 7 a.m. and we're all 15 years old and have stayed up the entire night playing this fucking game, just, you know, lying down on the floor of the futon when it's not your turn and then getting up and playing. And just because my one friend is like, no, we are finishing this goddamn game.
One more turn.
That's, and then for there on out, it just held a kind of position in the sort of canon of games that like I just sort of assume if I don't want to waste a ton of my time, I just shouldn't even get whatever installment has been released because I'm going to play it.
My first memory was just seeing Civ 4 in one of those Scholastic book order pamphlets.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And thinking, I wonder what that's all about. It looks sort of like Age of Empires. And then a friend of mine had it, and he said, oh, yeah, no, it's not really like Age of Empires because it's turn-based. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of boring. Maybe I won't really give this a try. And then I didn't. And so Civ 5 rolls around, and a couple years into that being on the market, it was on Steam for like a weekend for free.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes
okay.
they just have something up for 48 hours for free. And so I thought, well, I'll just play it over this weekend and see what I think about it. And I was just like, this is the best thing I've ever played in my life. It's so good. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I immediately bought it, and it became very important to me that year, specifically, which we'll get into later.
Yeah, it's interesting because I stayed away from Civ for so long because the buy-in was so high. Because once you bought the like vanilla game, then there'd be 3 other expansions, and they'd all be like $50 each. Like it was, it seemed like a thing that was just kind of out of my price range at the time. And then
and the barrier to entry from a rule set perspective too, because each of those expansion introduces its own rules into the game too.
So yeah, a lot of barriers of entry. But then I booked my first regular like off-Broadway job, and I had like disposable income, and I was like, okay, why not? I'll throw down some money for this.
Well, and you had other people in that cast who were playing it too, right?
Yes. Well, because I made them. Brian.
Oh, you were the first. You were the first.
I was the first. I put a lot of time into Civ 5, and then Civ 6 came out, and I would say that Civ 6 is really where I connected with the franchise. I've played 745 hours of Civ 6. I've put in a lot of time.
Thumbs up.
That's that's kind of, it's a little misleading because what I would do is I would leave it on for the entirety of the show, and then every time I was off stage, I would do like 2 or 3 turns before running back on stage. So I wasn't actively playing it for 745 hours, but I've gotten like about almost 100 achievements on it. Like I've put in the time and work, and the thing that I think I've learned most by playing Civ 6 is that there is a certain level of difficulty in which civilization is fun, and then there is a sharp drop-off point where it no longer becomes fun.
Yeah.
Yes. I think I've played about 200 hours on Civ 6. At one point when I lived in New York, my wife and I were in a studio apartment. It was probably about 300 square feet. And I can never quite figure it out. So maybe I've told the story and I've said a different square footage. So if your fans are listening to the show, they're like, you motherfucker, you better get it right. But we had one of those ductless mini split air conditioners, like the nice ones, the one you typically see in Europe and Asia and stuff like that. And randomly, we just had one in this apartment in New York, and it worked really well in the summer. It was like fucking incredible. But like I played Civ 6 so much one day, so fucking heavy duty with graphics card churning and everything on my desktop that it generated enough heat that it overpowered the air conditioner. My wife had be like, "It's actually kind of hot in here. Can you stop fucking gaming?" I sometimes I play games seriously, Civ 6 seriously, trying to actually like up the difficulty or do something to that effect. Actually go through it and just be deliberate. Don't just like all night play it or anything. Like be serious, trying to sort of like compete, if you will. And other times it's just stupid. It's like, no, I want to convert the entire English Empire to Islam or something like that.
Absolutely.
Take screenshots and be like adding Tommy Robinson and be like, look, Bradford's Muslim now. You some shit. Like things along those lines. So it really just depends. But yeah, Civ 6. I went in hard for 4. I think 4 and 6 are probably the ones I played the most. I did play Rev, which is stupid. And I got to the point where I could beat Rev on like the hardest difficulty when like you started the game and there were like 14 barbarians surrounding you. But
when you beat Rev, is it just like a collective like a rise from your phone?
It's just some stupid shit with some music and everyone, yeah.
For me, it's very brief. It's one memory. I had this game. My grandpa had this game on his computer. It came with, there was a whole book of CDs that came with his Sony Vaio desktop computer that he got in like 96. One of the games is Civilization. I was going through the discs. I was like, oh, these are probably just demo discs or something. Pop that sucker in. It was a whole ass game. I was hooked. And I have a distinct memory of one of the dialogue boxes saying something about disembarking, and I didn't know what disembarking was, so I asked my grandma to explain what it was, and she was like, wow, this is a really advanced game for a 7-year-old to be playing. So that's my memory.
There was a game called Caesar 2. I think it was a Sierra game. It was like a turn-based Rome strategy or simulator. And my dad has never gamed in his life. He's not into games. It's not his thing. I think he had a very kind of like, call it disinterest to disdain view of games. But he fucking loved Civ 2, Caesar 2. And one time he read the manual and he's like, wow, this is really interesting. He sat down with a piece of notepaper and a ruler and started drawing out like what he thought the city should be based on the stuff in the manual, and then got on the computer. And my mom said that at like 5 a.m, she thought she heard something. She got up and my dad was still on the computer playing. He's like, my city's going to shit. He loves it. So anyone can have a game that's going to hook them one way or the other, even if you think you're immune. So if you don't want to lose 200 to 750 hours of your time, maybe don't play Civilization, because if you connect with it, this will happen. You will convert the Babylonians to Zoroastrianism or something along those lines. Like, this will happen.
Just that like lo-fi Garfield meme. You are not immune to 4X games.
I mean, we'll get to religion a little later, but I would always name my religions things like uh-oh.
Well, let's dig right into it, because I know we all played at least one game of this. Nate, did you play it all in prep for this or not?
Recently, yeah. I'm not like immediately in prep for this, but I've over the past couple of months I've played. I learned that in Civ 6, if you play as the Canadians, no one can declare war on you by surprise.
Right.
So it fucking rules, because you can just basically have like one guy as your military, and as long as you don't mess around, like nothing's gonna happen.
Right. Yeah.
I've been playing maybe a bit too much. Man, we don't have air conditioning in Britain, so maybe I've been fucking heating the house up a little more, as usual.
I don't know about you guys. I use the randomizer. I'd like to use the randomizer when I get started.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I rolled Mapuche for my leader. The way he works is, I guess you have to try to play for governors. Like, you try to get as many governors as you can. And then you attack your enemies during either golden or heroic ages, which gives your troops a bonus for their effectiveness. So when your opponent is doing well, you can attack them and also do well.
I was playing as John Curtis. I was playing as Australia.
Oh, fuck Australia, dude.
And I got drop beared by Gandhi in Portugal about midway through because, okay, so Civ has this thing where it introduces an empire that's like there to neg you for most of the game, and just to be like, well, your people really don't have much culture, do they? And for me, it was Byzantium this time, and I decided I needed to exact revenge on Byzantium for dare calling me out, and I was swiftly annihilated. So then I started a new game as Eleanor, the English Eleanor of Aquitaine.
right, because she can be English or French in Civ 6.
Yes, and I won so hard. I think I'd won by like the modern era because I set the difficulty down.
Well, the difficulty levels are funny because the AIs are morons.
Yes.
They're never clever things. So the difficulty just creates really weird statistical problems.
Yeah, the game cheats.
When you go to the harder difficulties.
That's what happens. The game cheats so that those enemies can do better, rather than having more intelligent enemies.
I always do continents, huge world, normal standard speed. Right now I've been playing on Prince difficulty, which is challenging but not impossible.
It's a nice balance,
And I feel like it was actually kind of a boring game because it just came to one of those things where like you're doing pretty well, but like you wind up not having enough land in the initial period before like borders harden up, and then you just don't have the natural resources. So like you have to really go in hard on colonization or like make do with what you've got. But like invariably someone's going to be a dick and they're not going to trade coal or oil or uranium or tin or niter or whatever you need. One thing that I've noticed too that'll happen, and this didn't happen to me in this game, but it does happen pretty regularly, is that it feels as though if you, on one hand, if you establish contact with every civilization in a game early on enough, someone's just going to develop a grudge for some fucking reason. The AI is going to make them declare war on you, do something stupid. And if you think to yourself, okay, well, I'm going to, stay as big but also isolated as I can, and I'm going to like establish as much as I can of industry, extractive stuff, build the economy, like advance my science as quickly as possible. It doesn't matter because some fucking civilization is fully ancient aliens, and like they've already developed the internet in like 2000 BC. If you don't contact them, it's like I swear it speeds up if you aren't contacting them, and they're like fully already like building starports when you built your first granary. And so it winds up, you get to a point where you're like, I'm not gonna win. So, and I don't even care much about winning, but like it's gonna be annoying because I'll never catch up. And it's like 1300 AD. So I wind up stopping and wanting to play a different game.
Yep.
But I will say, if you're the Canadians, as Wilfrid Laurier, and if you can claim enough land to begin with, then you normally can do pretty well because no one will declare war on you. And so you can do a lot of things like, just trade with everyone, do trade routes with everyone, and become the suzerain of enough city-states that you just wind up having a ton of money. And so that just kind of lets you do whatever. And I mean, I think last time I got that far in a game, I didn't realize that if you don't flood proof for global warming, you can't reclaim the land even if you build it.
Right.
And so I wound up spending a ton of time building flood defenses thinking they could then Dutch style fucking drain the swamp, and they just didn't. So I wasted 70 turns basically putting a fence around a flooded city. That sucked. But I think one of the most annoying things in the game is when you've got some other priority and some dickhead just randomly declares war on you or has built some grand alliance. It felt like in 4 it was always the Babylonians. Maybe or the Assyrians. I can't remember what it was, but in 6 it feels like invariably there's one or two that really, really will hate you if you don't have a strong enough military.
I don't know if it works the same in 6 because I haven't played 6 as much as 5, but one way in 5 that you could easily avoid war for a really long time is just never offer open borders in a trade.
Yeah, that's true.
Because that's how the other civ finds out that you don't have an army. If you keep your borders closed, they can't explore your land and see that you don't have any standing units, and so they won't declare war on you.
One thing that I would say too is this was absolutely a technique in 4 you can't do in 6, and I'm very irritated by it. Is that one of the mechanisms by which you can really be a dickhead in 4 is if you ramp up culture production to the point where you've got academies, you've got performing arts stuff, you have things along those lines, you pick what your citizens' jobs are going to be and you focus towards the arts, you'll get great artist points and thus you'll be granted great artists. And not all, but most great artists, one of their options as a great person is to create a great work. And if you do that on a city that's got a shared border, especially if it's not a particularly big city with its own cultural influence, you basically steal all of their land because the cultural influence blasts your border out. So you just go up and have, Fyodor Dostoevsky write Crime and Punishment, right on your border, and you fuck them out of all their mines, all of their, every improvement they've got. It's incredible. It is so much fun doing that. It was as fun as headshotting someone in Team Fortress Classic or in Half-Life with a crossbow in terms of when you finally get to do it, you're like, yes, you bitch, I've got you. And you can't do that in 6 anymore. You can increase it. Great works do something, but I think they realized that was kind of a cheap shot and they took it out. And it's
yesterday I tried to do a conquest run that I just got too bored. But before that I played as the Maori. And they have a very interesting starting point. Usually you have a settler and then you just found your city on the first turn. I typically don't ever move my settler.
I try to get mine to the coast sometimes just so I can get the sailing bonus if it's a big map with a lot of water. But otherwise, you just kind of settle down where you are.
When you play as Coupe, you start with the sailing bonus because Polynesian civilizations always point to the time that they arrive there by boat. So you start in the middle of the sea and then you have to move to find a plot of land that you want to settle. So you have a couple of technologies already discovered, and also you get a bonus for not founding a city. Every turn you gain, I think, science and a little bit of gold, I think, or maybe faith, before you found the city. So I actually didn't found my first settlement for 30 turns because I just sort of went around the ocean and found the nicest place.
Wow. That's one of those things that's so cool they've added because it does create this variety in terms of how the game experience is.
So in the early game, and this is the case with Civ 6 as much as it is with the other Civs, you really are focusing first and foremost on the exploration component, right?
Yes.
Whether you are, like you were saying, Brian, sailing around, or in most cases, exploring the map using scouts and warriors and stuff like that. And I will say, scouting in the early game still kicks so much ass. It's still so fun. And it's the thing that when Sid Meier in that interview I was talking about earlier, he actually mentions that the way that they explore the map and stuff like that was inspired by a 1977 game called Empire.
Empire.
That's where you get the whole concept of like walking around and exploring the dark places on the map and like revealing that terrain. And it provides
like Garth
this
Marenghi's Dark Place.
That's also what helps solidify the like, yes, this should be turn-based aspect of Civ too.
But it creates this really remarkable feeling of like, oh, I am accomplishing something. Every time I reveal new land, I might find a goody hut. I might find another civilization. I might find a city state.
I'm sorry, a goody hut?
Yeah, the little
tribal village.
No,
Yeah,
I had never heard them called goody huts before.
Yeah, the goody
It's-
huts. That's like
I saw Goody Hut with the devil, so
Now I'm imagining a production of The Crucible where everyone is on Tatooine. And they're all giant slugs.
I've never played Civ 6 on the hardest difficulty because there was a time, I can't remember which one, maybe it was Rev or maybe it was 4, that there is the possibility when you visit a goody hut that it'll be hostile and just barbarians will pop up.
Yes, you get surrounded by barbarians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that happen in 6 still?
No,
Or is that,
I don't think so.
Yeah, that was so fucking annoying.
Very
didn't
annoying.
happen in 5 either.
In 2, it's always, you pop into a goody hut and you're surrounded by archers and horsemen. The worst.
Oh, what a
Fuck
nightmare.
that shit. Come on.
No.
Yeah, it sucks.
Thus making me realize after long and arduous work that there is no bonus to exploring goody huts with just an unprotected settler everywhere that you go.
Right.
You know, that might not be the best course of action.
But I will say, like, the way that they balance that then in terms of risk or reward is that there's way more barbarian encampments, which are a different type of encampment from a goody hut. And the barbarians are very fucking aggressive in Civ 6. There's a lot of them and they move very quickly.
And it's all luck of the draw, too. Like, sometimes you'll be playing on Prince, and you'll just get, like, 9 barbarian settlements that just, like, keep popping up all around you. And then sometimes, the one time I actually was able to beat Immortal on Immortal mode, I lucked out and there were no barbarians around me. So it really is sort of a luck of the draw about how difficult, like, the first couple turns is, depending on where you are.
I want to take this moment to actually ask a question then about... what the fuck is a barbarian, right? Like, obviously in a gameplay context...
They're German, Josh.
Yeah,
in 2, if I remember correctly, I think maybe it was 4. Sometimes the barbarians would found their own cities. I can't remember if it was if they captured one.
If they could cap a city, and then you'd have a barbarian city. Yeah,
and it would be called. I remember when I was like, it would be called like Magyar, and I'm like, that's right. The Hungarians are fucking barbarians. All right, I'm glad you said it.
But that's the question, right? Is like the idea
just
of
lost Hungary, everyone. We've just lost Hungary.
The idea of a barbarian implies that this is the opposite of something that is civilized. Right?
Yeah, right.
And this sort of goes back to some of the, I think, inbuilt assumptions about what the world of civilization is, that we are moving forward in that there are these other people who aren't even really people. They're just barbarians who are stuck in the past. And I'm curious what you guys all sort of think about that.
It's rough. It's a really rough element of the game, particularly in early Civ where the diversity of leaders, it heavily skewed European. Right. And it's always been like that balancing act that Civ has been able to pull off at certain points better than others. I think nowadays, with the addition of more and more civilizations with leaders of color, it starts getting a little less tenuous. But it really was like it kind of goes back into like the theme of like defeating the savage other in order to colonize and bring progress to that place, which is, it's colonialism, the game, essentially. And it was for a really long time.
Well, actually, it's a different game that Sid Meier made. But
that's actually called colonization, but that's neither here nor there.
Oh God, there's a game. What? There's a
Sid
game.
Meier's colonization.
Yeah, which is you can also play. They made an expansion for 4 where you can play it in the 4 engine.
I also think that colonization, much like Pirates, has an exclamation point just to make it extra fun.
I believe you're right. Yeah, it's actually very fun. But Civilization, regardless of like who it's going to include in it, is always going to be a game built around Western concepts of history.
Yeah,
right.
And the barbarian thing, especially like if you read Herodotus or like other ancient Western historians, they always kind of start with like the founding hero of whatever society, and they made their name by fighting off the barbarians. That's sort of this repeated refrain that shows up in early history that, just continues, especially once you get to the point of like transatlantic colonization. That becomes more there actually was a mode in Civ 5 that was a continents mode where the continent on the other side of the planet would not be settled by a civilization, so that you could scramble to try to colonize it, and it would just have barbarians all over it by the time that you actually could reach it.
That ended up happening to me in my game of Civ 6. We'll get to that later on, but...
That happened to me in real life once.
Yeah, periodically in Civ 6, I've noticed this where it'll be like an Arctic territory or something like that, and it'll just be like all barbarians, and it's not even really worth your while. Or they'll be protecting like one, aluminum mine or something like that.
Right.
Just all around it. They're like, they might be barbarians, but they fucking love handheld devices.
They sure do.
I was thinking about this too, that, living in England where this was a Roman colony and they fought the barbarians. They famously built a big wall where they're like, yeah, we just don't want to fucking deal with anybody north of this. It's interesting because when you think about the sort of concept of civilization, the game where, for example, if you build a city and there's a barbarian encampment within the adjoining squares of it that would normally form that city's territory when you have founded it, then it just destroys the barbarian camp on its own. It just evaporates it, and it's just sort of like, yep, land clear, terra incognita, etc.
You get 50 gold.
Exactly. Where something that was interesting to me was last year I went to the city of Bath, which was a Roman city and is then a medieval city and then a really famous like Georgian resort. I think it's the only naturally occurring like hot springs in the United Kingdom. And in the museum of the Roman baths, there were these Roman curse tablets that had been preserved, which if you're not familiar with, basically you would go write everything to like, fuck this specific guy, I hate him, to like, to the guy who stole my shoes, you piece of shit.
Right.
And you would throw it into the baths, and they're sort of like, offering to the gods like, hey, will you please sort this complaint out for me? And one of the things that was really fascinating to me was that according to the museum, the only written example of British Celtic language to exist is this curse tablet that they found, in which someone has used Roman, like Latin script, but is not writing in Latin. They're writing in British Celtic to basically say, fuck this guy who stole my shoes, fuck this guy who stole my druid potions or whatever. Which is to say that like, there's a lot more kind of like cultural mishmash happening even in this kind of like, forgive me for using the nerd term, but kind of liminal zone where like they've established an outpost, but there was never like a big city. It was just, it was fully like the stage of a game of Civilization where you have your city, but then there's a lot of unclaimed territory between you and there's just a road and shit, Great place to send a trade route to dig a road for you in 6. There's more kind of intermingling stuff happening, which kind of puts challenge to this theory that all you have to do is, build the city next to it and evaporate the barbarian camp and collect 50 gold and there's no more barbarians anymore. They just get absorbed.
Right.
Like, obviously there's an absorption eventually, but like this country, for example, is obviously still retains a lot of its sort of Anglo-Saxon or pre-Anglo-Saxon, fucking, I don't even know the names of the Roman Celtic tribes and things like that.
But I think the point to that too, though, is that, it's not as if this is like the civilized group versus the uncivilized group. These are just two different cultures that are coming up against each other.
Yeah. One thing that 6 does is there is this setting where barbarians can become city-states.
Yeah.
Oh, so you also have these city-state entities, but you can check a little box, which I like to do because it can make them less annoying. Where barbarians over the course of time can gain enough points to become a city-state, and you can also pay them money to leave you alone, or pay them money to give you a unit, or pay them money to bother somebody else. Which is, it's just a lot more interesting. And then again, they become a city-state later, so then they have all of the advantages that you have with any of the other city-states.
That sounds a lot more fun and more interesting from a gameplay perspective than just random super aggro guys who attack everything they see.
So check that box next time you play.
Yeah,
I'll
try that. I've never done that. I was just thinking like the barbarians establish a city-state, and it has to come up with names of what a barbarian city-state is. It's like, Salt Lake City. Wow, that makes sense.
The barbarian settlements do all have their own names, and they just
sun dance.
When they become a city-state, they just use one of the names that's in the database that is not currently on your map. But like while they're barbarians, they're like Wolf Clan or Eel People or something.
Wolf Clan was my Team Fortress 2 clan name.
You can tell too, like how much they acknowledge the thrill of exploring the map because this entire game, Civ 6, is map themed.
Yeah.
So instead of like cloudy areas and dark areas, it's just, blank parchment and
Here,
then
there be
everything that
dragons.
you're.
Yep.
Yeah. And so all of there's like sea creatures and compasses on it. And then when you've discovered a place, but you're not there, and it would usually be in darkness, it's now like hand drawn and it looks really nice.
It does look nice. It does, I think, hurt the legibility of gameplay a bit.
Agree.
I wish that they had found something that was a bit less like the exact same color as the map. But it is cool. So yeah, after the ancient era, we move into the classical era. And really what the game is trying to simulate here is this idea of like something resembling a society, right? People coming together, forming some sort of a basic system of government. I started out doing pretty well, met the Mongols. We became a classical republic pretty quickly, discovered currency. And yeah, this is the part in the game where we are introduced to the government system. And in Civ 6, the government system is a bit different in previous installments. In previous installments, you would find a form of government, you would switch to that form of government, and it would generally give you like stat buffs and nerfs depending on the nature of the government. Whereas in Civ 6, a government gives you a series of slots, and you can put policies into these slots, and which slots are available is dependent on which government you choose. But it's not as if the government that you choose has the same sort of strong it doesn't prescribe in the same way the choices that you need to make in gameplay.
I always tend to go for autocracy at the beginning because I'm a big wonder guy, and it gives you a 10% boost to building your big world wonders. But it is always funny. I always feel bad about using the fascism one. Like if I'm playing as like a warmongering or at least a civilization that has a lot of buffs to like military stuff, fascism is kind of the way to go because it boosts all your units. I don't ever feel good about it. I'm not. It doesn't feel good to have 4 of those bars. But you know what? When I'm nuking Canada, it feels a little bit better, is what I'll say.
Yeah. Because I came from 5 being my first game, and then I played 4, and then I played 6, and I never played 4 all that much. I get so paralyzed by just the fucking sheer volume of cards to pick from.
Yeah, they should have a way to sort of root out like the last
glosses
ones.
over, and it's just like I can't keep track of all of that shit, and I know I'm definitely not doing the best thing. What they were trying to avoid in 6 was in 5, people figured out how to optimize everything.
Yeah.
To the point where you just like, no matter what victory you go for, there were like these mantras that people followed that it's like, rush this technology first, do this branch on the policy tree. Because in 5, you just have these permanent policies that you choose.
Right.
Yeah.
And once you hit it, it's just there for the rest of the game. And then, you've not only locked in that policy, you've kind of locked in that tree because you get a big bonus for finishing each specific tree.
That's right.
So you don't want to just mix and match as much as possible. So what they're really going for is making you make choices rather than writing it out. Yeah. And I personally kind of like to ride more things out. There's already so many choices in this game.
So I think that there's sort of a paradox of choice here where like you were saying, Brian, there's so many options.
They make other 4X games.
That's really funny, Brian. I get it. Yeah, paradox. Never have been able to get into like Europa Universalis or whatever. Anyway,
me neither. Too complicated.
I think Nate that you had sort of something to say too about like the way that policies work in this game, right?
Well, I would say with Civ 6, I agree the idea that you find yourself in a situation where you're like policy overload, and there are certain ones you kind of want. Like I appreciate Classical Republic because the additional trade routes, but certain things like, what is it, God King, plus gold and faith in your capital. When you have one city, that makes a lot of sense. When you have other things, like it can make sense. But I feel like, to me, I always wind up orienting myself towards more money from trade routes, more accessibility to trade routes, and more money from city states, because I just feel like the method that I've always had since I started playing this game, 23 years ago, has been like, you always want to have as much money as possible to be able to buy improvements or to buy units, because it just can be a lifesaver if things go really, really haywire. And so I also suffer from the sort of policy overload. As regards stuff in the classical era, like monuments by comparison, something I find interesting is that, you know, there was always a race, for example, in Civ 3 and Civ 4 to get the Great Library, because once you get the Great Library, like if 2 or 3 other civilizations had discovered a technology, you automatically gain that technology. So it's sort of like that was like a hard kind of gate for you, was get that. I don't think you have that advantage in 6. Also, as far as policies and governments go, I would be remiss if I did not note that I find it very interesting in 6 when you have the initial sort of, I think they call it like chiefdom. It's the first government. And you have like what looks like a statue of like kind of like a human figure, like looks like an Olmec or a Mayan statue, something to that effect. In 4, when you start out, your government is barbarism, and it looks like an illustration from a Dickens book of a guy like swilling beer and fucking ripping meat off of a leg bone. He's dressed in like Victorian clothes or you know, Georgian clothes. It's bizarre. Like, it always seems so hilariously out of place, but also funny. I do think that there's a little more self-seriousness, and that comes through like in both the artwork and both the like kind of aesthetic, but also in the fact that you kind of like de-gamify some of those things. Like this one wonder basically fucks everyone over, so you want to get it first. Things like that. 6 doesn't have as many of those. I do think that the overwhelming choice of policies though can be like, sometimes it's just sort of, I click through because I'm like, fuck, I'm just happy with what I've got. I don't care.
I'm the same way with governors too, where it's just like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good luck.
I think the other thing that makes Wonders a bit different in 6 is the fact that you have to select which plot they go on to, and some Wonders have adjacency bonuses. You're exactly right, though, Nate, that like in the earlier Civ games, especially, it's the pyramids and it's the Great Library. Those are the two. Whereas Wonders are a bit different mechanically here, and it is actually somewhat viable to go for a strat where you don't build Wonders in 6, which is interesting.
It's really just era bonus at this point. I mean, there's some things that gives you advantages, but like if you're trying to lock in things so you don't have a Dark Age, if people haven't played the game before, or you haven't played 6, one of the things that's interesting is that you have era score, and you have to at least maintain a certain, it's like certain accomplishments, certain discoveries, certain breakthrough moments, what is they call Eureka moments, discovering a natural wonder.
Or even just like building the first of something.
Yes.
So it's like the first time you meet a city-state, or the first time you build a certain district. So
first
it like tries to keep you,
the world.
keep you to play like rounded.
And so if you get more than, there's basically a cutoff threshold to avoid a Dark Age, and then there's a second one to get a Golden Age. And then if you have a Dark Age and then you get a Golden Age after that in the next era, then you get a Heroic Age. And so
Heroic Age,
all these advantages you can possibly have. But that changes up the calculus as regards Wonders. It's no longer like get these 1 or 2 things and you can absolutely fuck over all the other players. It's more like don't fall behind. But then also you can run out of space, because if I remember correctly, in 4, certainly in 2 and 3, Wonders were all built in your city center. So you have an unlimited number of Wonders. Whereas now you both have Wonders that can only be built in certain eras, but also like they have to be on a suitable land tile, and you can run out of land, and a Wonder takes up one of them. So fully there's an extent to which civilization has like gotten, you know, like a Botox injection of Settlers of Catan. Like that's a thing. It's changed everything down to like the hexagonal tiles.
How was that for you, discovering, like going to 6 from having played 4 in the past and being like, what the fuck? There's a hex now?
My buddy was playing 5 in his barracks room in Korea, I remember, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, what is this, Settlers of Catan? Like, what's happening here? And I realized they had just changed it up. And I was sort of like, I was kind of a purist about it. I was kind of like, I don't really know if I can tolerate this. Like, like I believe that we were a proper strategy game. It was called Civilization 4.
We used to be a proper country.
Exactly.
I think what really fucked me up was when I fired up OpenCiv again recently. OpenCiv is like an open source, basically creating the ultimate version of Civilization 2, and that uses hexes by default now. I was like, hell no.
There is one wonder, though, that happens in the classical age that if you don't get it on certain game modes, you are kind of fucked, and that is Stonehenge. Because Stonehenge gets you a free great prophet, and that means you can found a religion.
You know, faith was a pretty big part of 5. It is a massive part of 6. It is probably the most important non-military, like moving stuff around the board components of this game.
Yeah, so I know why faith got introduced in 5. So the director of Civ 6 is also the
George
director.
Michael said you had to have it.
Boo.
Got to have faith.
Let's have a moment of silence for that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. So the director of Civ 6 is the same director as the Civ 5 expansions. So Ed Beach came in, and the main reason that religion was introduced was they wanted to give you more opportunities to sort of change things up, right? More opportunities to make choices. So you have different bonuses that come from religion, and religion by its nature comes later in the game.
Right.
So that way you can be like, oh, you know, I was focusing on war early on, but now I actually want to pivot
Right.
and be more diplomatic or
And
be
I
more
found God.
scientific or
Yeah.
something like that. So by introducing the religion mechanic, you have these bonuses that come from people following your religion. It's still kind of light, especially in Civ 5. It's still just a little...
It's a garnish.
Unnecessary. Yeah. It's not something super important. And so they really beefed it up here in 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where there's even a victory, right? You can get
There
a
is.
religious victory. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's talk
Love
about
it
our
when
religions.
becomes the world's religion, you know?
So it was your religion this in your playthrough, AJ? Tell me more about
Yes.
and its fundamental tenets.
Yes. I mean, I'm very proud of, but I also, you know, I love it when the entire world starts following the religion of dildos. Like, you know, varying things. I mean, the ability to name things in this game is wonderful. It's surprisingly complex in this. You have the prophet, which founds the religion, but then you also have apostles, which can add like different tenets to your religion that give you certain bonuses. And then you just have regular missionaries, which are basically like your ground forces. You can have warrior monks that fight battles for you, which is just absolutely wonderful.
You have two forms of warfare. So you can avoid going to war with someone and just have a religious war where it's just your religious units shooting lightning at each
They
other.
call this theological combat, which I think is actually really funny.
Yeah, you beef it up by becoming a good debater.
My closest neighbor when I was playing this last time was Wilhelmina of the Dutch. And so she just was constantly trying to Protestantize me. I always choose one of the religions that just is like it's just like an animal symbol.
Yeah.
And I'll just call it the lion religion.
Yeah.
Because I'm a very boring man.
In 4, I used to always choose Judaism. Sometimes I do in 6, but more often than not, I just choose the crab symbol and I make it crab dance. And that's the religion, you know.
That's what I did this playthrough as well. Siddhartha Gautama was my prophet, and he founded the religion of Crabtown ladies. They sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah.
Yeah, it's weird because one thing that you can do also, whether part of me feels like I'm being racist against myself when I do this, that you can make it so there's tithes in religion. That's one of the things you can pick as one of the tenets of religion.
That's a huge power if you play it
so
right.
basically,
You can get so
a
much
certain
money.
amount of gold per turn for every adherent to your faith. And so when I play and I conquer the world for Judaism, and also everyone has to pay me for every Jew in the city that they've got. There's a part of me that's like, fucking gotcha. But then a part of me is like, the Russians actually wrote this great big book about why this is a bad thing. And so there's an extent to which I feel a little bit conflicted about that. But yeah, the tithes in general is very, very helpful in the sense that, you know, if you have religion, and particularly a dominant religion, and particularly if you're on a continent where none of your neighbors get head up about you converting their cities, because some places will fully like cause a diplomatic incident with you if you do. But if they don't, then it can be
like
great.
the Dutch.
The Dutch do that?
Oh, they're awful.
The Japanese
They're
do that
horrible.
too. They really don't like when you go and you evangelize within their borders.
The Dutch get mad when you evangelize even once, and they just flood you with missionaries.
So
They're rancid little fucking carrot growing people.
This is real life. This is not in the game. This is real life.
Oh yeah, but in the game they do that too.
It's like, damn, all of a sudden, I didn't look at that icon. I was too busy, and every single one of my cities has been converted to Svarta Pete.
Oh no.
We just want to spread civilization.
It's just
And there's certain golden age bonuses too that you can buy civilians with faith as well.
That's what I do all the time. So I buy my traders and my
I didn't know
workers.
that. You can
Traders, workers, and settlers all with faith. Yeah, in certain eras.
It rules.
There's also like you can, depending on the tenets that you set up for your faith, you can also make it so that you can buy certain buildings, certain districts, things like that with faith as well.
I remember
which
Golden
can be
Age you
very
can buy
powerful.
you could literally buy campuses, or not campus, but any district you wanted on faith, but only during Golden Age. Yeah.
You can theoretically buy just about anything. It's just about, again, making a choice as to what that faith can do for you.
But I think this is a really fun example
do.
of, rather than being super literal about it, they've just taken a concept and built a gameplay mechanic that exists for the purpose of fun, rather than being like, well, how did religion really work? Because you can take it and you could try to create something that abstracts the role of religion in day-to-day life, but it wouldn't be fucking fun.
And there's no inherent bonus to any particular religion. Like if you choose Judaism or Islam or the crab religion or crab dance or Crabtown Ladies or however you want to call it, there is no... there's nothing built into that the same way that there's something built into playing as a German or playing as Eleanor of Aquitaine or something like that. It's just you choose a symbol and then you're able to choose your benefits after that.
I feel like there's something about Civilization where I try to be good. I try to be like a good, just ruler for a while. And then when I start to lose, I turn into a tyrant. I turn into like a mad tyrant. Or honestly, if I get bored and I'm too far ahead, I go full militaristic. Is that something that happens with y'all too? Or am I like an absolute sociopath?
I am an absolute pacifist until someone fucking declares war on me, and then I make tank armies and I fucking destroy them. Until my government forces me to accept a peace treaty from these people, I'm like, I will leave one of your cities as a joke. Otherwise, like I feel bad eliminating an enemy civilization. I always do, but I will fully tank army just rampage through that shit and get so all of a sudden like you go from being a civilization with like 8 cities or 9 cities. I feel like 8 is about where you need to be to get the bonuses of having 8 of something in different cities. So you want to be about that size, but I'll suddenly like, it's like these dickheads tried to like declare a quick cheeky war to steal one of my settlers, and now I have 41 cities because I've taken all of theirs. Safe one like that. That's kind of how I play. But I never declare surprise war. I think in Revolution, I would sometimes declare surprise war to steal someone's settler, but like that's harder to do in 6 because they they aren't as stupid about leaving settlers exposed. It's just a settler is such a, if you're not
or
familiar
the
with
barbarians take them.
And that can be nice too when the barbarians have taken a bunch of other civilizations. And then you take them from the barbarians. You take them back. Barbarians, basically, you get to work out all of your militaristic impulses. But I just build cities, build archers, build walls, do the defenses, etc. Stuff I need to do. Always very defensive. Build naval units mostly to explore, and then obviously you get some era bonuses for doing certain things. If someone, obviously, like you don't want to be so far behind on military units that you can't catch up if you have to in the event of being attacked. But basically, I never declare surprise war, but if someone, and I always refuse offers from other civilizations to go into alliances against people to declare war. But if someone does it to me, then I'm just like, bro, I'm making you into a cityscape.
I think that for me, it's sort of dependent on what happens during the early game. Like I identify sort of who my potential rivals may be, particularly if they really start encroaching on my side of the map. And that's actually exactly what I did in this game once I got to the medieval era. Because once you get to the medieval era, then what you can do with the military starts to get interesting, particularly when you get knights. Once you have knights, that really starts to open the game up. And for me, what happened during the medieval era is I entered an heroic age, and barbarians wiped my northwestern city off the face of the map.
Oh no!
And my southwestern city was under
not so heroic now, are you, Josh?
No. And my southwestern city came under heavy loyalty pressure from nearby Ottomans, and so
that happens in the Southwest.
It certainly does. And so I just went ahead and decided to show the Turks. I decided to give them what for, basically. And so I set up a military campus near the border of Istanbul and just started pumping out high-level knights and crossbowmen, and basically just fucking. I also had like 2 city-states that were near Istanbul, and so I declared surprise war on them. Moved in with my knights and crossbowmen, laid siege to the city, and fucking wrecked Suleiman's shit.
a really important thing you can do in this game too is levy a city-state's army.
Yes.
Which I just did yesterday in my conquest attempt, where I went to war and I had some units, but I wasn't, not enough. But I had this one city-state right next to their border that had a ton of units and was basically single-handedly, I was able to use that army to take all of Greece.
Oh, wow.
It can always be interesting with city-states because like they'll just randomly have 18 advanced units. Like some of them will have like one archer forever, but some of them will have like, wait, you have modern anti-tank armor.
Yeah, it's like 1,300 and they have tanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And so yeah, levying them is amazing. And that can be helpful too, because I think sometimes, you know, depending on how hardcore you want to retool your economy towards going to fight a war, it can be useful where if you can levy a city-state's military and your own units to just sort of do a defensive thing and just kill every one of their units that crosses into your territory, because like the AI is stupid, but it's not so stupid that it won't eventually give up after it has to go at least 10 turns. But if you just basically kill the shit out of everything that they put at you and leave them alone, like if it's an inconvenient time for you to go steamroll them, then or you just, you know, technologically you can't compete, then like that can be a great way to like not have to spend the next 30 turns repairing literally everything and, you know, sessions. Yeah.
What did you think heading into 6 and seeing how much the war mechanic changed?
It's weird because I saw that change happen in 4. There was a big update to 4 a couple of years into it. Like I want to say in like 05 or 06, they did a big update where you downloaded it and like it did things like, for example, giving you your probabilities of how well you might fight.
Oh yeah.
Like it changed the animations in it too. And so I was already kind of prepared for that, but like I appreciate that in the olden days, because that's something that I think a lot of people, if they haven't played this game or they've only played the newer ones, might not realize, is that you didn't really get any information on probability or any like what your chances were. You had to kind of keep track of the unit strength. Yeah. And once again, in Civ 2, you had that stupid fucking conundrum where like, oh, a Zulu spearman has killed your tank. Like that would happen. Yeah. That doesn't really happen
as long as you
now.
got city walls up, that's gonna happen.
That continued all the way through Vanilla 5 because it used to be that units had 10 hit points and every hit had to take away 1 hit point. And then they just, for the updates, changed it to 100 hit points. So that way a low-level prehistoric unit couldn't really do anything. But AJ, just because you don't know, everything up through Civ 4, you could stack your armies.
Yes.
So you had these, what did they call them? It was just like the unit of doom or something
stack
like
of
that.
Doom. I think it's Stack of Doom.
Stack of Doom, where you'd have like 20 units in one single space.
On one tile. Yeah. And generally it was legions. Legions were really good for this in the mid-game in 2. Yeah, you would create a stack of 20 legions and just advance on Rome or whatever.
That
so
sounds
like
amazing.
cities didn't have their own defenses in Civ 4
that's
or the earlier ones.
A very important improvement.
So
I
if
think.
there wasn't a unit garrisoned in the city, you could just walk straight into it. No matter how modern it was, no matter how advanced that civilization was, you could just walk right in. And then if not, you just had 2 stacks of doom constantly fighting against each other, which also hurt legibility. Yep. You didn't really know what you were up against when you started to go to war with something.
Right.
Because it could be a couple units or it could be an entire army in a single space.
Well, and again, the AI cheats, right? So particularly in 2, closer to the end of the game, you know, you can still build things that will increase the ability of the units garrisoned in your town to defend. So like you can build city walls, you can build a shore defense, that sort of thing. But it's not the city itself defending, it's the units in the city, and it grants them a boost. So in the late game, you would have plenty of, you know, troops in your own city, but it didn't matter because the AI could, you know, just spawn like 10 stealth bombers and just send all of them at you.
Jesus.
From anywhere on the map.
Oh. Yeah, I would say that the reach of some of the advanced units, they scaled it back a little bit, and that makes it still fun when you get into the point where you've got nuclear weapons or, you know, long-range bombers, things to that effect. Because in the olden game, it was just like, it was just stupid, the level of power you have. I do find it very funny now when, because of those mechanics with the hit points and the relative strength based on, you know, the class of unit and, you know, the stack you have, because you can stack up to 3 units now.
But it turns them into one unit, and that's an important distinction. Like you can create a corps or an army, but it combines the units together into one.
But it is very funny when you have like a modern army and just like someone attacks you with like a crossbowman and it's just like immediate death. Like that is, there's something fulfilling about that. Like when like someone comes at you with you've got, I don't know, fucking like one of the higher end AT units or something along those lines, and then someone's coming at you with like a musket man or a knight, and it's just like immediate death. Like that makes it at least feel as though there's a reason to continually update your military units and kind of like strategize along those lines, because I mean, I'm not going to say like it's not like turn-based, or it's not like real-time stuff. It's not like StarCraft, like your Zerg rushing people and shit. Right. But there's an extent to which you can at least like you play it more in a sort of action-y way versus like chess. Whereas in the early games, it felt like you just had to basically have like an array of people in places, because you didn't really know how many units one of their units or stacks was going to get through. Right. And you could really game some, like just like the thing I was talking about with great artist fucking super expanding your borders with Culture Bomb. There were ways you could kind of game the blind spots of the mechanics to be an idiot. It was fun, but it was also really stupid. Yeah, like Zerg rushing in StarCraft, basically like it's annoying because it works.
There is nothing, I think, more satisfying for me in a game than getting the stealth bomber and destroying city walls like they're like Swiss cheese. But I also feel like early game, like war conflict isn't as fun for me as when you actually have the goodies and stuff from later eras.
It especially like before you get planes, because because your units can't stack early on either. They're all next to each other. You can find yourself in these situations where like you can't lose, but you also can't quite take the city.
Yeah, it's just irritating. It's just endless grinding.
And so you just spend a lot of time. You have these ranged units, and their range gets reduced by certain environmental factors I've never quite been able to wrap my head around.
Sure.
And so you just kind of sit on this city for turn after turn after turn after turn.
And then when you get it,
finally you fucking get it.
And then when you get it, you have to keep its loyalty up because it's constantly trying to go back to its other civilization. So you have to assign like a governor to it, and sometimes that's not even enough.
And policy cards and things like that. Yeah.
So you can always take a city by force and occupy it and get that loyalty. But what if there was a different way, a non-violent way, a more diplomatic solution? We'll find out after the break.
Ooh yeah! What up, shape fans? The literal devil here. You ever look at shapes? Like you look at a triangle but get way too horned? Or you look at a square like a little bitch? Or you look at a pentagon but are like, ooh, more side please? Then hexagons are for you, you dirty little side slut. Hexagons go all the ways. North, south, and the other 4. You might be like, but the literal devil, what about heptagons? Fuck you! You draw a 7-sided figure, I fucking dare you! People keep drawing me pentagrams thinking that'll get my attention, but the literal mark of the beast is 666, not 555. What am I? A telephone number on Everybody Loves Raymond? More like Everybody Fucks the Devil? It's like nobody listens, you know? So embrace the only figure you can finger and slurp those sweet polygonal juices like the nasty little shape fucker you are. Hexagons. Oops, all sides.
We finished up the medieval era at this point, and we are moving now on firmly into the Renaissance.
The Renaissance.
That's right.
If you will,
Brian,
which I won't.
I will.
I'm going to call it the Renaissance.
A lot of times by the Renaissance period, you want to already like have, you want the Renaissance to be kicking in like 900 AD if you're going to be like actually winning it. And like, I was more or less on track, but that's way behind. You know what I mean? On track for human civilization, way behind in the game of civilization.
Yeah.
Do you go into the game knowing what kind of victory you're going to try and get, or is it more about like feeling it out as your civilization develops?
I think for me, it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, but a lot of the victory condition that I at least initially tried to push for is based on what the unique abilities and units are of the civilization and leader I am playing as.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's usually like, oh, this person can do these things, so I'm going to focus on getting money, or I'm going to focus on building culture. Or yesterday when I tried to just go for a conquest game, I just straight up chose Alexander of Macedon.
Yeah.
And went that way. But usually I play like Josh, where I just kind of put it on the randomizer and see, and if it's someone new who I haven't played as before, I keep playing and then just try to play to that strength however I can.
When you play as the Mapuche, when you attack an enemy while they are in the middle of a golden or heroic age, you get a major fucking boost, especially if their city is close to your city. And so for me here, this was an excellent moment because the moment that we entered the Renaissance, Suleiman got a golden age. I had my troops ready to go because I had been massing them during the medieval era. And again, I was just able to send all these knights and crossbowmen across the border and just fucking wreck their shit with a helpful assist from the Mexico City Musket Brigade.
I almost always go for space race victory, I think, just because of the fact that if you're pushing really hard for an industrial economy and keeping ahead on tech, that's probably your best bet. You can kind of play diplomatic while you're at it, and if you're not a dickhead and like the AI works in your favor, then sometimes that can work.
Regardless of how stacked your civilization is at a given point in time in terms of your economy, your science, etc., the diplomacy in this game is always a challenge. And in Vanilla Civ 6, it's completely inscrutable. Like you will not know what is going on, and all of a sudden, like you've been doing your whole own thing the whole game, and all of a sudden everybody denounces you at once, right? Yes. It's just bizarre.
This is a problem in 5 as well. Like they never, I think Civ 6 now it has it like really clear lines for like what someone doesn't like about you. They have agendas that you can take a look at. You know, they have these you piss them off points. And then there are also like these diplomatic points, right? So diplomacy in Civ 5 is all about really just having money and paying off city states as much as possible, and then incorporating spies once the time comes. And so in 6, who can explain diplomacy?
I can't,
because I can't.
Can you, AJ? Can you?
It's
Nate?
pretty inscrutable, but here's basically the gist of it. You get diplomacy points when you win things at the UN.
Because there's diplomacy points in terms of the points of that win you the game.
Yes,
but then there's also these little podiums that you get. And those are how you vote on things.
Right.
It's like you spend your little podiums.
And that's
that
mostly
you can kind of trade, but no one ever wants to trade them.
Right. And then there's also basically a victory track that exists in the game where if you get to 20 diplomacy points, you win the game immediately.
So the original Civ, right, you win the game by either killing everyone or going to space.
Space!
Right? By the time we get to 5, there are diplomatic victories as well. And a diplomatic victory in Vanilla 5 was just the UN comes around once you get to the modern era, and then you hope to get enough votes from your city-states to become leader of the world via the UN, which just means you spend a lot of money at your city-states.
And that's how the world works, too. Everybody knows that the UN is the most important governing body in the world.
Right.
Yes, of course.
We saw Thief in the Night. That's what it's about.
That's right, Brian.
So then they were like, well, this is terrible. This really sucks. So in the expansions to 5, what they did was they came up with a World Congress that appears in the Renaissance. It appears even earlier in Civ 6.
Yeah.
It appears almost immediately in Civ 6. It's always very funny. It's just sort of like, wow, we're having the World Congress when we haven't met any of the other civilizations and we haven't discovered writing yet.
A little tooltip pops up. There's that lady being like, you may go to the World Congress now.
Josh, I don't know how to tell you this. I think that only happened in your game. I have no idea what you're talking. Yeah, no, the lady who appeared to be on my screen and said, "Hello, Josh Borman. That's you, Josh. Come to the World Congress."
Come on now. You know what I'm talking about.
You're like, enemy cities have gathered strength. Like that person.
That lady.
Yeah, the lady who pronounces envoy is envoy. We have another envoy.
Oh, right. I turned them off
City-state
like.
neighbors have made a request of us. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, canonically, she's
really
the
good.
wife of Sean Bean.
Yes.
in the Civ
Yes,
6
that's
lore.
right.
There's like
There's
weirdly
lore.
specific lore.
Yes, and she versions of
Sean
her,
Bean is like a Cloud Atlas guy who's died many times over
That's
throughout
right.
history.
and,
Yeah,
and,
it keeps
and,
getting
and
reborn.
his various wives at various points throughout the game who are all that lady. If you watch the trailer for Civ 6, she's
Yeah.
the one who ends up saving the
Yeah.
world at the end of the game. She goes to space.
So the diplomatic victory in 5 in Gods and Kings and really in Brave New World becomes more about dirty tricks because now you have spies, so you can
Right.
initiate a coup in a city state. One thing you can do is that if you have a very aggressive world leader on the map that's wiped out another civilization, go to war with them, capture one of those cities from the civ that they wiped out,
And then give it back.
bring them back to life.
Right.
Because then they're your zombie thrall and they
Right.
will do everything
Which is
for you
honestly
after
really
that.
cool. That's a fun mechanic.
The last dirty trick that you do is that you secure your city states with enough money and everything right before you're about to get to the UN vote, and then you just declare war on everyone else. So that way your city states are also at war with them and they can't buy influence from them anymore. So there's actually like a lot of like tricky things that they figured out how to do. And then for 6, I think they tried to make it trickier and it's incomprehensible to me.
Yeah.
I would say I appreciate the fact that you can use diplomatic favor to purchase concessions from people, because in the past, for example, you were always kind of hitting up against a wall where, for example, if you were to say, don't proselytize to my city, those be like, fuck you. And your
Right.
option is declare war or not. Whereas now you can basically get them to make promises. You can, if they ask you to like, don't settle close to my borders, and you fulfill it for 10 turns or how many turns it is, you don't, you gain some diplomatic favor that way. I appreciate that in terms of the way you have because you have your stupid AI driven diplomacy things for trade and things along those lines, and like it's not great, but it's less annoying in 6 than it was in any of the other previous games, where you just hope that the AI was stupid and would make a mistake and be like, yes, here, I'll give you, I don't know, fucking 1 copper in the year 2000 and you'll give me literally like every technology I haven't discovered yet. I don't think you can trade technologies in 6, which you could in the previous one.
In 6, diplomacy is more complex than ever, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Whereas I think, we talked about faith earlier, and with faith, it's just, you have your apostles and missionaries run around, they proselytize on behalf of Crabtown ladies, that gets you a fun bonus, and also...
So much Stephen Foster in this game.
And then every once in a while, you also just get to fight another, evangelist, and that's kind of fun. This happens, I think, at such an abstract level, and the layer is so abstract that, to me personally, it just didn't feel fun, and I was confused by it. But Nate, did you have a thought about that?
2 things. Number 1, I think the reason for that is that faith is generated based on how much you accrue from the things that you're doing in your civilization, the units that you have, the structures that you have, things along those lines. And so it's entirely like a point system, things you're accruing yourself, and you're able to spend however you want, and you can deploy, and in certain advantage periods, you can deploy it for even more stuff. It doesn't really depend on the AI in any way. And I think this is the one thing we've talked about a little bit, what we probably should address is there's a unifying principle throughout the entire history of the franchise. The AI fucking sucks. It's really
It's so
stupid.
bad.
It's incomprehensible. Like, you cannot get it to do things even when it would be advantageous to the other players, unless you are it puts you and just you, the human player, at such a disadvantage that it's not worth it. Like trading a precious commodity, even when like you have something they need and no one else has it, they won't trade with you just because they're like, no, fuck you, I have all the aluminum in the world, deal with it. And they don't trade it with anyone, so there's not really any value to them because there's a finite amount they can use. And so I feel like in terms of trade, in terms of agreements, in terms of whether they'll accept something along the lines of an alliance, a research alliance, open borders, exchanging things along those lines, like it's just like randomly you'll have great cordial relationships with a civilization the entire time, and you cannot build an embassy. They say, fuck you, no, you just can't. I won't let you. It makes no sense at all. And I feel like faith, because it's a thing where it's something that you accumulate on your own and you dispose of or you deploy as you see fit, and it can let you kind of strategize certain advantages, is a lot easier than like, well, hopefully when I put in this random fucking Stone Age ass World Congress that maybe I'll get this advantage or maybe I won't. There's no way of knowing, and there's no way of really strategizing besides completely blasting all of your diplomatic favor on something, when really it's just sort of like, oh yeah, this shit again, I don't care about it.
Yeah. And every time the World Congress vote rolls around, you're like, I have to fucking do this shit again? God damn it.
Yes.
Well, and 5, the way that it worked in the expansions for 5 is that the World Congress was like, we're going to have a vote in 10 turns. It's going to be on this thing that's proposed by the top dog. Right. So you can propose something and then you spend turns plying favor for it, right? You either get people to vote for the thing you've proposed or vote against the thing that someone else proposed that might hurt you. Yeah. Here, you just vote completely blind. Like the thing is proposed to you and you vote on it, and maybe other people did too, but who knows?
Yeah, there's no way to tell which way any civilization is going to vote on a thing.
Yeah.
So really you just spam as much as you can into the thing you want and hope that that's going to be enough. But then sometimes, like, if one of the civs has like a diplomatic favor that's like in the, triple, quadruple digits, then all of a sudden you're looking at like, you're like, well, I put in 12 votes for this, so surely it's going to go. And then it's like 19 votes to 12. And it's like, well, what the fuck?
Sure. It's even better when it's just like an unmet player. And it's like, all right, thanks, unmet player. Have a fucking great time.
Yeah. Just voting with like a man literally sitting in the shadows going, no.
Surely on a very practical level, you would meet them at the Congress, right?
You would think, right?
But I want to move on now into the industrial era, because this is
Let's
where
pollute the skies. Let's go.
Right. That's right.
Let's get Kenneth Branagh dressed up like Isambard Kingdom Brunel and have him liplessly smile at things, just like in the 2012 London Olympics. Okay, that's for me.
No, I get it. I mean, I absolutely get it. I mean, like, let's have Danny Boyle be like, hell yeah, we're literally uprooting every fucking bit of civilization to make people work in this dog shit factory. It's making something we don't even know what it does. It's like, you know what I really, really think is a great cornerstone of our nation's history is we used to breathe in smoke that you could chew, and like everyone did it, and now we're not a proper country anymore.
It's such a great scene because Branagh is like, first of all, he does that Tempest speech where he's like, this beautiful island, everything is green, and then they just strip all of the sod and like astroturf off of the field. It's just black. And there's like glowing red lines, and it's like it's a good thing. It's cool, actually.
This was all part of the 2012 Olympics opening ceremony. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, Danny Boyle is no Zhang Yimou.
Mamma mia.
Well, the thing you got to remember about it too is that this was sort of like the actual Francis Fukuyama, last man in the end of history for British centrist liberals, and 2012 is the era they must, return with a V to, despite the fact that mere blocks away from the Olympic facilities in Stratford, they were just like mass arresting people. Right. Like it actually fucked that part of Northeast London quite badly. Yeah. Everything about the Olympics is weird. It's just sort of like this, as a sidebar comment here, like it's very funny because when you think about the industrial era, there are two countries in the world that really, really completely fucking changed from how they were before in that initial period. I mean, obviously all countries did, but in terms of just like countries that went from like, the village green fucking cottages to like fully like everyone lives on top of each other in like a city just called tuberculosis, like that. They are the United Kingdom, with newly formed of England and Scotland, and Switzerland randomly, because Switzerland was one of it went from basically like yodeling cottage to like the place where literally everyone is sewing and making fucking textiles. Right. In that period, I mean, obviously every other country changed eventually, but the point I'm making and saying is,
and the United States of America, of course. Don't forget.
Of course, yeah,
Merca
that's
number
true.
one.
It did exactly. It's like we've always been on the bleeding edge of different kinds of indentured servitude, and that era was no different. But the thing I would say is, something I appreciate about Civilization, especially Gathering Storm, the downloadable content expansion pack for 6, is that it kind of foregrounds the long-term world environmental implications of this era from the very beginning. And this is the point where like it actually matters, because you have to have factories to be able to have enough industrial output to be able to make these units without it taking you 100 turns. You have to have, eventually at a certain point, you have to have electricity, which means in the early part, you either go without electricity the entire time, you get balls lucky and you have fucking hydropower, or you use coal power and you massively overpollute your CO2 budget, and you start like sea levels start rising and deserts start expanding and things like that. I appreciate that that's included in it, because in previous iterations of this game, it was just like, no, fucking everyone's got a factory and a nuclear power plant and a coal power plant and an oil power plant. Just like, there's no such thing as
going
air.
all at once. They're right next to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we don't breathe.
And I think there was actually a global warming mechanic in Civ 2. It didn't really do very much.
Yeah,
interesting.
It just randomly fucked with things. I remember that. Yeah.
Huh.
But I guess this is a good opportunity maybe to get in a little bit to the climate change mechanics of the game that, again, you don't see their full effect until later on. But this is the point at which you start to make trade-offs between, as you were saying, Nate, do I use fossil fuels and fuck the long-term future, or do I try to do sustainable development, which then ends up putting me far, far, far behind the curve and fucks me over completely? Those are your choices.
And it's also very funny is that at a certain point in Gathering Storm, you can actually use your industrial output to do direct air capture and remove CO2 from the atmosphere,
which is completely a fantasy, but they had to put it in.
No, it's real. It's real, Josh.
It's very funny though. You can lower the globe's temperature, but it doesn't reverse any of the damage that's been done. So like, I actually just for shits and giggles, I've done my entire economy on direct air capture long enough to like lower the temperature like well below, like basically create an ice age, but I cannot get my fucking sunken Netherlands back. Like it won't ever happen.
But you know what? There's a wonderful wall there, Nate. You built a wonderful wall.
That is true. Yeah. There's definitely a pillar, says Ozymandias, etc.
One of the things that you see when you're settling places, right? And if you're near a coast, it gives you little numerical values for like how many levels the sea will rise. Right. Does the ice at the north and south of the map actually melt?
Yes.
At all?
Yes.
It does. So there are areas that become passable.
It becomes passable. Yeah.
And also all of the barbarian units that were trapped behind ice all of a sudden are unleashed upon the world.
We're not prepared for that happening by 2030.
No, that's one of those unknown unknowns is the ice barbarians that will be unleashed from the Svalbard vault.
Carrying battleships and stealth bombers.
The crew of the Terror slowly thaws and takes over the world.
Yeah, I feel like people would take the Paris Accords a little more seriously, or the Paris Agreement, if they knew that if we don't correspond with it, then the 13th Warrior is going to happen to us in real life.
But yeah, I mean, the question I guess I have here is, they tried to gamify climate change here in a way that sort of aligns with what our current understanding is, plus adding the fantasy element of, fucking carbon capture and being like, yeah, this is definitely a real thing that will happen. So as to preserve what I think is civilization's fundamental optimism about the future of the species.
Yeah.
Right.
But my question is this real? Like, what does this say about the world? And does this actually align with where we're going? Does this fundamental optimism track with reality at all?
There are things about this mechanic that I really, really like. One of them is that to build the flood barriers, you can't just buy them with money. Like, you actually have to invest cities' time into doing it. And like the inherent message of, we actually have to put in the work if we're going to reverse this thing. And there still will be catastrophic damage no matter what we do, but there are ways that we can go about like mitigating that damage, I think is a very good message. But, again, with taking the carbon out of the air, it's just not scientifically going to happen in time.
Well, and I think the major thing with climate change being a feature of this game is that it shows up at the time of the game where you have to win. Yeah. Other parts of the game you kind of coast through and you develop and you build and you can, hang out. But the modern era, you are trying to win. Yeah. So the social response that happens to climate change is, well, how do I use this to win? And so it turns out, if you're trying to win the world, you have to do horrible, terrifying, inhumane things, right? So there's not really like a message in that game for the good way to handle the realities of climate change. There's just shore up your resources, leave the planet,
Right.
shit like that.
Well, it's, in a way, it's like this game's been around for, over 25 years now, almost more than 30 years.
More than
actually.
30, yeah. 91.
And millions and millions of people have played it. That is to suggest that any one of those random guys on Twitter offering to suck off Elon Musk thinks that maybe you can win a fucking space race victory and then none of this climate change stuff will actually matter.
Yeah.
Like it'll genuinely just be, hey, you know what? Game's over. We won. You got ranked. You're like, actually, I'm like kind of like a mid-tier ruler. Like I would say you're sort of like Ethelred the Unready or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Right.
But it'll be done, as opposed to, you can look at examples in human history of civilizations, city-states, things along those lines, where it just became untenable. And it's like, that's something that's interesting to me, is that the game hasn't yet gotten to that point. Like, you can obviously have stuff fuck your civilization so bad that you lose a lot of your capacity. If you're like super coastal, it can really damage things like that.
Right.
But I think the idea of sort of like, there's always that space between, like when you get into the modern era and you're just, future tech 25 or, future civic 25, like social media cubed or whatever the fuck it's going to be. It was very funny to me because I was, this thing, future tech and all that shit was happening in Civilization 4. And it's funny because there are new ones that have been added since the franchise has continued, and social media is one of them. And it's like, damn, I thought the future Civic was going to be fucking cooler than Facebook. You know what I mean? Yeah. But it's a thing that you can see that incorporating, kind of keeping track. But like, there's always that space like, oh yeah, in the future tech, like whatever, it'll just be, one big fucking refrigerator that'll cool the ocean or something. Who knows?
Yep. Yeah.
But like,
one big battery
that
that charges up the entire planet. Yeah.
I hope that there's a mod for like the science tech somewhere in the Steam workshop that's just NFTs.
I was gonna say, yeah, but
the final frontier is just bored apes.
Yeah, exactly.
But every policy actually makes everything in the game actively worse and harder.
Yeah,
like it's climate change.
It's a world wonder to develop the blockchain and nothing changes except your CO2 budget just goes fucking through the roof.
But that's the thing that is interesting to me. Like we joke about that, but there's no, at the end of Civilization, if you don't score a true victory through science, through whatever, the points are going to be tallied, and whoever has the most points is going to win the game. There is no world in Civilization in which everybody loses, right? And that is fundamentally, those things feel in tension with each other to me. The idea that, we want to address the idea of climate change, but at the same time, this is still a zero-sum game in which one civilization will win and the other civilizations will lose. I think that those are fundamentally incompatible, and I get that it's a game, but I still think that's kind of interesting.
Well, and that's part of the thing is, about Civilization, about the fact that it's a game in its purest form, right? It's like a board game.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like a game in that like Dark Souls is a game, right? It's like it's free form. It is about like playing something. It's not about the rise and fall of civilizations. It's about the rise and rise and rise and rise and rise. And so it somewhat inadvertently, but somewhat intentionally becomes this sort of positivist Steven Pinker, Francis Fukuyama. I mean, it came out a year before the end of history came out.
Oh, wow.
There's actually a really good video that was made a number of years ago now by Yaz Minsky on YouTube, sort of a not very large YouTube account, but they're very good. And their video about Alpha Centauri kind of talks about those contradictions and
Great
how
video.
Alpha Centauri, these people are all going to another planet, and while they're still on the ship, they start breaking off into different ideological factions because their material reality has changed so significantly from life on Earth.
I mean, there's a part of me that wonders sometimes, because you think about the changes that need to be made, and you think about when I say need to be made, I mean for the game to correspond to the present moment. When you think about it's sort of what it saw as the end of history or the terminal point where everything else is just sci-fi in 1992 versus 2005 versus now. And I think about this, that like in democracy was the terminal point. It was fascism, communism, democracy was the terminal point where nothing further could advance in 4. Now in 6 you have, what is it, like digital democracy, corporate autocracy, I think is one of them. And there's something else I can populist totalitarian, something along those lines. But basically they're all kind of like
luxury gay space communism.
Yeah. They're kind of like shitty derivations of the previous things. And those definitely weren't in, and they had to be added. And it sort of you think to yourself like, okay, in Civilization 7 is like, it's going to be like, are you going to have to factor into like, societal disintegration? Or you going to have to factor like deglobalization, degrowth, the COVID-19 pandemic, a nuclear armed walking battle tank called Metal Gear. Like, what are the things they're going to have to include? Because like, that's the reality we live in. But also like, you can see that notion of 1992 post Cold War, it's going to be this from here on out because nothing else can be possible, kind of changing, but not changing in a way that kind of expands horizons. It just sort of envisions that you can have that, but have it also be bad and getting worse. And that to me, I think is one of those, like, I remember this very clearly for my job. I one time had to record a session with a client, and they were speaking with Jonathan Sachs, who was the former chief rabbi of the UK. And he talked about what he did in his free time in this interview. And here's this very incredibly storied, incredibly, highly regarded, Jewish community leader, scholar, religious scholar. And he said he loved reading Steven Pinker's books. He thought he was just so brilliant and inventive.
Oh, boy.
Now, we did it maybe a week before I did that. We had done an episode of Trash Future where we had read Steven Pinker's books. Now, Steven Pinker hypothesizes that in the future we can mitigate climate change by creating what he describes as autonomous cloud ships that would fly around the world endlessly, powered by solar power or some other future tech 27, and they would seed clouds to mitigate climate change. And you're sort of like, yo, what the fuck? Do you guys think this guy like has anything useful to say? But you realize like that, oh yeah, things are gonna work out fine. Positivist kind of wig interpretation of history that everything is forward progress no matter what, and like no matter what, like it's gonna be resolved because technology always arrives in the nick of time. I feel as though the Civilization franchise is very much kind of grounded in that domain. Yeah. And it's a fun game to play. It's a really fun game to play, but it really does have a, for lack of a better term, an extremely 1992-ass vision of the world at its core.
Well, and Pinker loves to like trot out this hilarious chart that's democracy versus autocracy over time from 1800 to 2010. And so it's just like, here's how much democracy there is in numbers. Right. So like in 1800, there's -8 democracy.
It's like the fucking chart in Civilization. Your final score where it's like the bar goes up. Like, oh my God.
In 2010, there's currently 4 democracy.
Okay.
That is literally one step removed from like you claim to be downwardly mobile, but you will consume 100% more Cool Ranch Doritos than any media ever would.
That one guy who was like on Twitter who was like, we must return to a traditional agricultural society. His very next post was, I can't find any Cool Ranch Doritos.
So the like middle of the 20th century, of course, is just a wreck. We're just below zero for autocracy, but what we're trying to do is hit the great heights of democracy that we hit. The peak of it was 1920.
How many democracy were there at that
time?
time?
The world was free, and there was like 3.5 democracy.
Weimar.
At that point.
Okay,
we got the Weimar.
Right? So like we didn't reach that point again until like 1992.
Sure.
And then it shot even higher. Everyone got so free in the 90s.
Maybe that's the reason for the popularity of the Peaky Blinders undercut. It wasn't that people thought Cillian Murphy was hot and they wanted to look like him. It was like, they're like, no, 1920 was absolutely the peak of human civilization. And like, I want to demonstrate my dedication to bringing that back.
I'm going to score every like period movie by how much democracy number there was in it and then model my life off
and when it's really fucking good, you start singing Baba, yeah, do, da, 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 da.
Going back to, original Civ and sort of the underlying assumptions of that game, the fact that the 2 win conditions are complete and total military domination, or you do enough science to go out into space and propagate the species further. That also speaks to the understanding of what the world was at that time. Because at that point, for the United States, it looked like both of those were the things that we were going to do. We had basically already accomplished a domination victory, and now we were on our way to space race.
We are all pretty close in age. I'm 37, and I think for younger listeners, it would be hard to overstate the weird, deranged optimism that existed in the 90s about the sort of, I mean, like, I think that Fukuyama's analysis is far less simplistic than the title of his book, and I think the title of the book is truncated, so it's not just the end of history. But I think the extent to which you can look at the disintegration of former Eastern Bloc countries, the like ethnic cleansing, genocide around the developing world, you can look at the just economic vandalism done to Russia. And all throughout that era, despite the fact that there was so much obvious human misery taking place, there was this really, really strange sort of like, in the future, you know, things are going to be even better than they are. Everything's getting better. We're all going to listen to techno. Like, there's just this feeling of optimism at that time. And I don't want to say and that thus civilization has taken root and poisoned soil because that's where it's from. But like, I feel as though that notion of endless progress, that comes from an era, and I feel like a game now that tries to retrace human civilization and show a progression, I feel as though is going to be like have more in common with Disco Elysium than with this. This is just like a legacy product in a way, because I feel as though not everyone, I mean, you realize like not everyone and most people still, you know, by and large, like are like in terms of political sensibilities about these things aren't necessarily all that, not as cynical, but or even not even expending that much energy on it. But I do think that a lot of that kind of discourse has just been disabused of this notion that like, yep, it's all going to work out great, guys. No problems. Yeah, we're solid. No real point. We don't even really need to track years anymore because like there's no need for years. Like we're good. We're just gonna hit future tech from here on out.
Yep.
And it hasn't worked that way.
Generally speaking, in the game, once you are hitting like somewhere between the atomic to information era, this is the point at which victory starts to happen if you've been playing aggressively.
I thought Civilization 4 was the pinnacle of the model, and I skipped 5, obviously. I was not mentally or emotionally prepared for, in Civilization 6, you have a touring rock band that plays concerts that makes everyone Muslim. And that to me is genuinely, I was like, wow, y'all have gone fucking far with this. This is actually really cool.
This is the end of history.
The rock band mechanic is amazing.
The rock band mechanic.
That could be a game in and of itself.
Yes.
Well, we haven't talked about culture much, about a cultural victory.
We should talk about culture a bit because that leads very naturally into the rock band and stuff like that. Yeah,
So cultural victory, I think, was introduced in 5, right?
Could you not do culture victory in 4?
Was there a culture victory in 4?
I don't think there was,
but I didn't play enough
remember.
4. Okay. So 5 had this really awful cultural victory in vanilla. It was just
not great.
You get a bunch of culture points, and once you get enough points on the meter, then you build the culture wonder. Doesn't even have like a picture or anything. It's just like you just put production in one city towards something, and then you get it.
Oh, it's the 2012 London Olympics opening ceremony.
Yes, that's right.
That's right. And you win
it's
the
just
game.
Kenneth Branagh's face.
Mr. Bean shows up. It's awesome.
Be not afeared. The isle is full of noises, sounds and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not.
You know, that also got a revamp in the expansions to 5, where a cultural victory, they introduced tourism, and then you have great artists again, and they create great works of art. And it's a really fun thing because you get to see these cool paintings, you get to see like ancient songs that can be composed, and you can also use those composers to do concerts in other civilizations. So then you're playing this kind of difficult to read, but you can sort of get the hang of it numbers game of how to influence other civilizations, and they've basically just carried this over 1-to-1 from Civ 5.
I think the interesting thing about culture in 6 is that in many ways, I feel that this is the system that is closest to the way that the world actually works, where as you develop a more and more culturally prominent empire, and especially when you get the rock bands and start to take them on the road and use that to evangelize on the behalf of Crabtown ladies. That really is, you can see examples of this obviously with South Korea with the Hallyu Wave. You can see examples of that with like Beatlemania. I mean, rock bands genuinely are one of the strongest cultural forces ever created.
Yeah. It's so funny they can fail in this game too.
Yes.
Yeah, you get
and
bad
then that
reviews.
It sounds different. Yeah. I was just going to say, I wanted to spend a moment to talk about the music in this game. In addition, just because we're talking about rock bands, not just Christopher Tin's a second great opening theme after his Baba Yetu in Civ 4. And this is, of course, a longtime composer for this series, Jeff Knorr, and Roland Rizzo, Griffin Cohen, and Phil Boucher, who all provide these really clever motifs in this game. So before, you always had like a song representing a civilization and then a few others peppered in to give more, to fill out your 20 hours that you're going to be playing through a game. Here, each civilization, and I don't think they have the war themes this time. So in 5, you had a war variation of your theme as well.
Oh, wow.
Here, you have one for each era. So if you play as Australia, of course, you're going to get fucking Waltzing Matilda stuck in your head for the rest of your life. For America, and they use this in all of their promos, they had Stephen Foster's Hard Times Come Again No More, a truly beautiful song. And they all have different arrangements. And again, this is kind of playing to this idea of history as a thing that always moves forward. They start very simple. So Hard Times Come Again No More is just like a plucked banjo and a fiddle, I think, at the beginning. Yeah. And then by the end, you have like electronic remixes of everything.
Although it doesn't quite go full techno, which is unfortunate.
No.
To your point earlier, Nate, like it should all be techno. That's the end of history.
The end of history is that you have a hot European girlfriend or boyfriend who looks like either Franca Potente or Moritz Bleibtreu in Run Lola Run.
That's right.
That is the future. Like when you achieve that, then civilization has topped itself. And it's just like they didn't quite go far enough. No, I would say too, I remember in 4 similar like motifs for eras. I remember a lot of harpsichords in the Renaissance period. I remember some fiddle music, things along those lines. I think there was a piece called like Funeral March, like when a civilization has been eliminated, and like it would play and things along those lines. But I find the music is it's less repetitive to the point where like I typically listen to other music or to podcasts when I play this game. But if you don't, if you choose to listen to the music, I feel like it is quite good at this point. And it's always been okay, but it's gotten a lot better as this sort of like kind of engrossing thing. I think the sound design for one of the things that I was really interesting in the sound design was that when you zoom all the way to like super macro view, you hear like what sound like winds really cool. Like high altitude. And when you zoom in really close, you can hear like clanging hammers, like work happening in the cities and things like that. Yeah. So there is a kind of like engrossing feeling to it. And I do think that they've taken advantage of a lot of the sort of technological developments. I think that like the wonders when you complete a wonder in Civ 6, you get this sort of high speed animation, like stop motion style animation of it being time lapsed, of it being constructed from foundations upward and things along those lines. Whereas I remember there being some kind of like CGI-ish sort of animations for them in 4. Like I remember there was like a Wurlitzer jukebox with Leonard Nimoy very distractedly voicing the lyrics to the Velvet Underground's Rock and Roll. But now there is like, that kind of like a more multimedia kind of feeling to it, and it's they've done a lot of work on it.
With 5, there was this increased seriousness, right? Like Civ 1 is very silly.
It's so silly. When you discover a new tech, Sid Meier is the one letting you know that you did it. He's standing right there in a fucking
have him like
toga.
Dressed up as an ancient Greek.
It's awesome.
And so, and like they have pictures of like ancient Rome, but it's like they have like a stadium billboard where it's like Lion 6, Christian 0.
It's all very
whatever.
Silly. And they brought back some of that whimsy, I felt, which I liked.
Yeah, and so with 4, Leonard Nimoy, they got a big celebrity voice to read Bible verses and historical quotes and quote Sputnik and say beep, 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 beep. And they didn't put it in his contract to get him back for the expansion, so it's just Sid Meier doing the voices for the expanded stuff.
Oh, wow.
But then with 5, they're like, no, we're going to be very serious. Everything's going to be kind of watercolory and realistic, and we're going to have hexes now. And all of these quotes are going to be delivered by William Morgan Shepherd of Gargoyles and Mad Men, and he was in the original Broadway cast of Marat Sade. He is... he's my favorite out of all. Sean Bean is great, but like William Morgan Shepherd and his just like, oh, great Hiawatha, will you once again? Just like, oh yes, tell me more. Tell me more about what I'm experiencing in this world.
And there is something so beautiful though about Sean Bean going beep, beep, beep.
AJ, what did you think about sort of the aesthetics of this game, I guess?
Oh, it's beautiful. You know, as you said, Brian, I started out with 5 too, and it is sort of like a watercolor painting. There's a lot of chiaroscuro, and it feels very sort of, it feels like a Renaissance painting that you're staring at for the entire.
And like when you complete a wonder, you get sort of a painted picture of the wonder rather than the in-game model.
Yeah, and it's beautiful. But there is sort of a wackiness to 6 that I think harkens back to the series roots in a really fun and interesting way.
They've bridged it. They have the silliness and they have the seriousness in both regard.
Yeah, and it's a difficult balancing act, but I mean I love hearing Sean Bean just read random quotes from people, and like I think Animal Husbandry is one where I'm
fond of pigs.
Yeah, it makes me laugh every single time. Yeah. But
it's funny that there's like a quote from Scott Adams in there.
Oh yeah,
the Dilbert guy,
the fucking insane Dilbert guy. Yeah,
it's not all of them are winners.
The element of whimsy is somewhat important because I feel like the nature of the game is such that some absurd, funny things can happen. If it takes it, so like you can't have a game take itself so desperately seriously, because then how are you going to react to a game like that? And when you have the notion of like, well, I almost had a dark age, but then I saw this really cool mountain and that put me right over the edge. Like things along those lines.
Well, the seriousness of 5 comes mostly in the form of like, it wants you to be amazed at things. It wants to celebrate history, probably even more than all of the other Civ games. There is just this sense of wonder and excitement,
reverence,
and discovery, and all of those other things that John Avery Whitaker allows you to experience the imagination
in his imagination station.
It's like, it's just. And this was important for me, for my history with Civ 5, because, I got it this, like my last year in college. And then I had a complete and total depressive breakdown where I could not leave my room for days at a time. Yeah. I ended up losing like 20 pounds in a single month.
Jesus.
Because I wasn't eating. And on the days where I could sort of do any kind of anything with my brain, and also my room was really cold, so I had to fire up my computer and play a game to heat it up.
Oh, no. Comes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning.
And this game became like my lifeline, honestly. Wow. It was sort of my reintroduction to being able to make decisions and like, take decisive action on things. Yeah. For a month, my brain just basically needed to fully reset itself. Sure. And on those good days, I would just go to town on Civilization and, beat Catherine the Great's ass to get to space or whatever, or something like that. There was something about the hope, as false, as like illusory as it is, and as illusory as like I know it is, it was nice to see some degree of positivity somewhere in my life, because it was not going to be found anywhere in those circumstances, and to get these moments of like, oh, there are things worth celebrating. There are things that are so amazing that are out there. There are amazing things to read and quotes to find, and things that are still there to be learned and appreciated and explored.
I would say that there's an extent to which this game can sometimes make you think, like when you create, you get, like you said, you get an excerpt from some famous novel, some great novel of the 19th century or something along those lines.
Yeah.
You think to yourself, like, that would be interesting to read. I wish I could, learn about this. You learn about new things just because of the level of specificity with cultures. You learn about cultural figures you might not have been exposed to before. And even if it's in a simplified version, you still learn a name, you still learn an event, you learn about a geological feature on the planet that you'd never heard of, things along those lines.
Yeah.
And then if you really want, you can pop into the Civlopedia and you can read even more.
Yeah. And in my case, I really got into Civ 6 in 2018. I was working a job in New York that I really hated, and I decided I wanted to quit, and I wound up moving over here. But like, a lot of my life seemed to revolve around being mad online. And what I realized with Twitter was that, or with Civilization, was that I would put my phone down and not give a shit about anything in the news or whatever new outrage was coming around. Like it was dumb, but like, and then, like when I got bored of the music, there was this, I felt bad because my wife had asked me to listen to the first season of Crime Town, which is about her hometown of Providence, Rhode Island. And I found it very easy to listen to a show like that while playing Civ. And like, it's strange. It's, for me, gaming comes and goes. Like I recently played through on an emulator. I played through all of Final Fantasy Tactics again, which is not an easy game, but I just know it so well from being a teenager that I knew how to sort of game it and beat it. And I did that. I'll probably play through Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VI just because it's nostalgia, stuff that when I was a teen, tween. I like Disco Elysium, but I feel like I can never really get in the mindset of, and then if you step away from that game long enough, you have no idea what the fuck is going on when you come back to it.
Yeah.
Civilization has basically been the only game that I regularly play. And like, I know exactly what to expect with it. And yet I find myself sitting down wanting to do it sometimes. And it's like, well, it's not necessarily like it's great for your eyes or your brain to be staring at a computer, but it's certainly better than fucking being on Twitter or working. And there's a weird kind of, I don't know, kind of like sense of possibility when you first open up a new map. Like it's just a strange feeling. And I can recall I was recovering from surgery on my knee when I was 21. And I was able to get it to work on a MacBook. And this would have been 2005. I was playing Civ 3 or Civ 4. I think it was 4. And I can just clearly remember, just enjoying kind of like the deliberateness of it while I was fucked up on painkillers. Or like, times that same year or previous year, I remember being over Christmas break and playing as the Greeks, I think, and like learning about all these names. And I was like, it would be interesting to learn about Greek civilization and stuff. And just like, even just learning the names of cities, there was this sense of sort of feeling like you were kind of learning. And I don't know, I've always appreciated, like, its obvious flaws notwithstanding in terms of its worldview and also in terms of its mechanics, it's just always kind of fun and you're always along for the ride. And I feel like there's a certain kind of person who doesn't really get into video games except for Civ.
Yeah.
And I feel like I've become one of them.
It's dads. It's a dad game.
Proto-dad.
One of the greatest dad games ever made.
My dad was yelling about my cities going to shit. I'm like, my entire fucking civilization, humanity as a whole is going to shit. Because these goddamn ice barbarians got unlocked because you motherfuckers had to burn coal over and over again.
The previous generation just doesn't understand the responsibilities we have.
Well,
They could just have one city.
We have the world.
Let's go ahead and sort of take this through now to the end, right? The end of a given game. For me, we went from the atomic era into the information era. Global warming started to kick in, but we hadn't burned too much, so it actually wasn't a big deal. Gary and his Goobers was a band that I formed. They went on the road. They were my secondary band. My primary band was doing amazingly at spreading Crabtown ladies, but they failed their concert on a 9%. Roll. Infuriating. And then to add insult to injury, I was like, I was at the point at the end of my game where I was just really doing pretty well. And I was like, I'll just fucking go for the science victory. But fucking Gorgo beat me on the diplomacy track and I lost. So that was my game.
I continued playing to see what would happen if I created an ice age by lowering the global temperature to like 4 Celsius below the threshold with direct carbon capture. And it didn't, there was negative carbon.
That's what Steven Pinker's little cloud ships are going to do.
Right.
Exactly.
I also did Space Race Victory because I hadn't done it in this game yet. but I also hadn't done a nuclear war yet, so I learned how to do all that. It's very confusing in this game.
It's very complicated.
It's hard to get my head around how the nukes work exactly, but I did manage to kill uncounted amounts of people, so I'd call that a success. I don't mind the space victory. It's still a little funny that I think it should just be balanced towards getting the launch being the ending, but instead they kind of add this other aspect where you devote production and aluminum resources to like
building a space station,
lasers or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the space ending is very good. I think as far as the endings go in Civ 6, it's the one I like. Civ 6, for whatever reason, just doesn't get me off the way that Civ 5 does. Well, I finish a game, I feel like it just takes longer too. Like this game just takes a really, really long time to finish. Like I could get through a Civ 5 game in a very long single day, and I can't do that with 6. Oh wow. And it leaves me feeling weirdly empty. And it could be if I went back to 5, I would feel the same way. It might just be that my time for Civilization games has passed.
Yeah.
And I just need to.
You've entered a dark age, is what you're saying.
I'm never gonna be a father. So
that doesn't mean that you can't enter an heroic age at some point in your life, though, Brian.
Yeah, that's right, Josh.
I feel like because I missed 5, 6 just feels like a different game. It's like the same mechanic, same concept. It's like within the same sort of lore extended universe, but 4 and 6 are so different that I just, like you said, I think my golden age of being a Civ player was 4. And to me, that was sort of like the ideal, but also like, I'm reaching sort of undeniable middle age here shortly. So of course I'm gonna look back on the game I played when I was like 21 and fucking like the warrior god king of all the twinks, and I was like, back in those days it was great, but but it's fun. 6 is fun. Yeah,
that's on Brian's business cards actually.
There's a lot of ex-twinks here on this podcast.
All of us are ex-twinks now. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you and AJ, you just aged out of it.
Yeah. We've talked about endings, the endings of the game, and now I feel is as good a time as any to end this episode of The Worst of All Possible Worlds. So,
Nate, do you have any plugs?
Yes. So, to be honest with you, recently I haven't been on a lot of shows just because I'm still recovering from a strategic intervention by a small insect directly into my lungs while bike riding. So, I'm actually feeling good about my ability to podcast that I made it through a nearly 3-hour episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
4 show. You're very welcome. I do produce 4 shows. They are What a Hell of a Way to Die, Trash Future, Lions Led by Donkeys, and Kill James Bond. So you have a leftist military and veterans podcast talking about the news and veteran stuff, but not from a right-wing perspective. You have a show about the psychic horror of capitalism and how you can make yourself smarter with business success. You have a show that's basically about military blunders and disasters. And you have a show about basically 3 trans people talking about James Bond, as they refer to as a famous tuxedo dipshit. James Bond, review all the Bond movies, and now have gone beyond Bond because they've run out of films, so now they've reviewed all the Bourne movies.
Oh, hell yes.
All the Jack Ryan movies.
Yeah.
And what
I saw Totally Spies. That's the most recent one,
Totally Spies was the most recent one. So yeah, so listen to some of my shows, and then you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @InTheseDeserts.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on again, Nate, and glad we finally got to do one that's fun for you.
Yeah.
Yes. In terms of stuff that we have coming up in a couple weeks, we are going to be doing our first ever live show. This is going to be happening at the New York City Pinball Championships. So if you are interested in that,
we'll have the link in the description.
Check it out. There's a discount. If you want to get the discount, you can go to patreon.com/worstofall, sign up for $5 a month and get access to a whole bunch of really great back content as well.
So when we talk about Civilization as a game, we've heard a lot of stories, I think, here today about how it got us through some pretty dark times. Even, I would play it mostly backstage at a show, and while I was having a lot of fun doing the show, it was sort of an isolating track in the show, and it could get very lonely, and it was a way of sort of dealing with that loneliness.
Yeah.
And I think the inherent optimism in the game is so refreshing to play now, just because we are kind of facing what appears to be the end of civilization. But there's something so wonderful about a game that appeals to that little part in all of us that looks at the end of the world, witnesses the catastrophe around us, like is so scared about the ice barbarians just breaking out of their ice and destroying us all, and looks at all of that horror and says instead, just one more turn. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Joshes.
So many possible worlds, but we got this one. So many possible worlds, but we got this one.
All right, folks, that is it for today. As always, you can check us out over on Twitter at TWOAPW or our individual accounts. Josh is at BoschJ, AJ is at The Fuzzy Mask, and I, Brian, am at Spox_Brian. Our guest, of course, is Nate Bethea. You can follow him at In These Deserts, also on Twitter.com. And remember, we are going to be at the New York City Pinball Championships. You've heard it twice already, but we're going to be doing that August 19th. It's coming right up. And if you subscribe to us at patreon.com/worstofall, you can check our pinned post and see that we have a discount code to come and see us on the 19th. But that ticket is not just for seeing us. You can also come in and play pinball. No quarters. It's all great. And speaking of subscribing, if you subscribe now for the $10 tier, you can listen to our off-the-cuff, just hanging out chat, the Lads Cast, where we just talk about whatever comes into our head. We just put out our first one. This will be a once monthly thing. Once we get to 300 patrons of either tier, then we're going to add another feature where AJ and I, and maybe Josh occasionally, but mainly AJ and I, will be reviewing movies. Fancy movie time. And if we get to 1,000 patrons, and I think someday we will, we are going to go to Colorado Springs, Colorado 80995, because Focus on the Family built a family attraction based on Wits End for all of the Adventures in Odyssey fans to make their pilgrimage to, and we are going to go there, and we are going to document it, and we are going to have a great or possibly terrible time. And I'm sure you don't want to miss out on that. All right, folks, see you next time.